I'm going to bring the session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, is there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There's no changes to the agenda this morning.
Okay. We have actually sort of a brief regular agenda, but a very important one, which is reviewing the staff's report on our summer preparedness for 2015. And Raj Adapalli is going to be introducing it, as well as we have Diane Barney, who's our Chief of Bulk Electric Supply, Tammy Mitchell, who's Chief of the Electric Distribution, Paul Darmetko is a Utility Engineer. We'll be going through our position, where we are this summer, and I see Michael and Scott and others are at the podium as well to answer questions. So we'll get started. Raj, do you want to begin?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Zibelman and Commissioners. I know it was only in the 60s and cool yesterday, but I can guarantee that summer is around the corner. Our electric power grid in New York is summer peaking, and as we approach summer, we need to review whether we are adequately prepared to meet the reliability needs of customers for the summer. A major thrust of our public service law obligation is to ensure safe and adequate service. That includes being prepared for this summer and beyond. Every year for the past several years, we have presented to the Commission how prepared the system is from both a bulk power level as well as from the distribution level. The staff preparation includes review of utility and the New York ISO plans and discussions with them. And as the ISO is interconnected and trades with our neighbors, our review also includes the supply situation of our neighbors. As you said, Diane Barney and Tammy Mitchell will discuss the bulk power and distribution system readiness. In addition to reviewing the system reliability, we also have been reviewing how utilities are addressing the needs of mass market customers, that is residential and small commercial, in mitigating volatility of electric prices. If utilities do not hedge and simply pass through market prices, spot market prices, customer bills could be volatile. The Commission has provided guidance in the past on how utilities should structure supply portfolios to mitigate volatility, keeping costs in mind. Staff regularly meets with the utilities in reviewing their supply portfolios, and Paul Darmetko will present what customers could see for the coming summer in terms of prices for mass market customers. With that, I'll turn it over to Diane, and we'll take questions after each presentation.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Zibelman, Commissioners. While the main focus of today's presentation is the reliability of the bulk electric system for the upcoming summer, I would like to set the stage by talking about the newly released load forecast for the state. The forecast, which can be found in the New York ISO's 2015 Load and Capacity Report, or the Gold Book, shows a forecasted peak load drop of about 1,500 megawatts by 2024 over last year's projection. On slide 4 is a graph of the historical load levels. The red line is the actual experienced peak loads, and the green line has converted those load levels into weather-normalized numbers. The black line is the forecast from a year ago, and the blue line below it is the revised peak load forecast for this year. If you look out to 2024, the difference between the black and the blue lines is about 1,500 megawatts. The annualized load growth rate dropped by almost half, from 0.83% to 0.44%. 1,500 megawatts is the equivalent of about 3 major power plants, or the capacity needed to serve about 1.3 million average-sized homes. On slide 5 is information expressed in annual energy usage. The annualized growth rate has dropped from an average of 0.16% to a flat profile. The 6,000 gigawatt hour decrease by 2024 would represent a drop of about 5 to 10% of the New York electric industry's CO2 output. Slide 6 demonstrates part of the reason for the drop. Note that in 2024, the ISO is forecasting about a 700 megawatt increase in DER resources that will be available on peak. In short, PSC efforts related to DER are increasingly being reflected in load growth projections. Previous estimates included mainly EAPS with a small amount of the New York Sun program projections. The ISO practice is to include DER projections for which there has been funding authorized. Between the Clean Energy Fund proposal from last September and authorized spending for the New York Sun program, the ISO is reflecting increased DER impacts. The remaining reduced forecast is due to a changing relationship of energy usage in relation to economic activity. Turning to the situation for the summer, Slide 7 shows the operational capability. As this table shows, we are marginally in better shape going into the summer than we were last year. Overall, New York has about 700 megawatts more capability to depend on than we did at this time last year. Slide 8 puts the load forecast for the summer together with the capability to estimate the system reserve margin. The demand forecast for this summer, 33,567 megawatts, is just about 100 megawatts lower than the 2014 forecast. Applying a 17% installed reserve margin produces a capability requirement of 39,273 megawatts. Compared to the 42,073 megawatts from the Slide 7, we calculate a surplus of about 2,800 megawatts, or about 900 megawatts more than we had going into last summer. Note that going into the summer, all of the generation capability represented by the 42,073 megawatt number is not yet available. We have 2 plants that are under repair for cracked rotors, one's recovering from a fire, and one is experiencing upgrades representing a total of about 1,800 megawatts. These units are all expected to return to service during June. In addition, this past weekend, Indian Point 3 experienced the loss of one generator step-up transformer, which has sidelined the approximately 1,000 megawatt unit until the end of the month. While all efforts are underway to return all of these units to full capability before the brunt of summer hits, this demonstrates how depending on an aging fleet of generation with a constrained transmission system can turn a robust margin into a tight situation fairly fast. Slide 9 shows the capability and required reserve levels since 2010. We have today about the same level of capability we had in 2010, but the reserve margin is slowly slipping toward the required IRM of 117%. As this happens, the location of the generation becomes increasingly important to reliability, as the transmission system is not free-flowing. More upstate to downstate transmission capability would provide more flexibility on where generation can be located to meet system reliability needs. Our neighboring control areas all report sufficient operating capability to meet summer peak load conditions. While PJM and ISO New England report adequate reserves, our neighbors to the north and west have significant resource gains. Quebec has almost 1,300 megawatts of increased capability over last year, and Ontario is up about 1,800 megawatts. I'll now turn from the statewide evaluation to the preparedness of the individual transmission owners as reflected on Slide 10. Staff collected a detailed survey from each of the transmission owners and had meetings with them to go over their input. All of the transmission owners report that they are able to meet peak load projections in all areas with all lines and generators in service. All of the TOs currently meet North American Reliability Council, Northeast Power Coordinating Council, and New York State Reliability Council planning criteria. However, those criteria do not apply as you move lower into the system or to radial portions of the system. So there are some isolated areas where there is a potential to lose load for a single contingency during peak periods. Staff is monitoring these areas to ensure that the transmission owners have up-to-date maintenance on these local facilities and have contingency plans in place if a problem does develop on peak in any of these areas. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Tammy Mitchell, who will report on summer preparations on the distribution system.
Before we go there, let me see if there are any questions for you. So, from the perspective of the, in terms of planning, as you're talking about the, the changing and the reserve output, if you wanted to, if you could take us a couple minutes and update us on where the activities are in terms of the work that you're doing with respect to the ISO as well as the other participants in the market to develop a resource plan for the state.
Okay. We have coming up many changes on the system. We're talking about all the rev changes, which is a major sea change within the system, and we're talking about the EPA Clean Power Plan, which is targeted to start implementing in 2020 through 2030. These many different changes are calling for additional studies beyond what the ISO normally does. The ISO does a reliability plan, they do an economic plan. We saw a need to start a state resource planning analysis targeting what we need to do to prepare for 2030. That effort is underway. We are being assisted by the ISO and the transmission owners in this effort. NYSERDA and DEC are helping us lead this planning effort. We have a defined study scope. Hopefully by the end of this week, we'll be going out to get a consultant to actually perform the study. We're going to be looking at 3 different scenarios. One is the base case of what the system would look like in 2 planning years. We're looking at 2024 and 2030, so we'll have a glide path year. As to what the system would look like, what it would need to look like if we didn't have any of these changes layered on. The second scenario will cover the Clean Power Plan, which is calling for dramatic reductions in CO2 output. The third will be implementing the Clean Power Plan from a REV perspective. So basically the difference between scenario 2 and 3 is what if you are looking at all resources available within the state of New York to meet the EPA goals. The third scenario is taking a look from the bottom up. First is top down. Second is if we meet as much as we can of all of the targets from the Clean Power Plan, from the State Energy Plan, from a REV perspective. What are we going to do locally, and only turning to statewide resources as needed beyond that. So we hope to have enough cases to bound where we can kind of poke at the edges of the bulk transmission system and see what changes will need to be made by that time frame. The time frame to have results are we should have the consultant on board in June, looking for base case results in August. Scenario 2 is in October, and January for scenario 3.
Okay, good. As you know, Diane, we're at the commission. We're very concerned that we have a forward-looking view of what's going to happen on the system, what the needs are going to be, and that we're thoughtful not only about what's happening in New York, but what's happening elsewhere and the pressures that we can have on the system. I also note that you're, certainly active in the Eastern Interconnect planning committees that are really looking at it on a region-wide basis, and I think that getting this plan done so we can, we can at least have a view towards what we need to do and start to be thinking about what investments are going to be needed, both locally in New York around making sure that we can maintain a resilient grid, but also is understanding the impacts that plays as the complexion of the industry changes, nationwide. So I'm glad you're part of it, and I think the commission will be very interested in getting these forward views so we can really get our arms around those issues. The other thing I wanted to, make sure you said, and I just want to underscore, is from the perspective of going into the summer, the reserves that we have in the system, particularly with the units we're expecting to come back are more than adequate to deal with outages. That's why we have them, and we're not worried about the reserves for the summer. Assuming that was how I took what your statement was, assuming that's correct.
We should be in very good shape.
And-
Today, even before those resources come back in, the system is fully prepared for contingencies, and with those units coming back online, that's in addition to what we need as a reserve margin.
And for that, I do want to note our appreciation. I know I've gotten a couple reports, both from the ISO, and I've seen reports from the individual TOs, including NIPA. And I believe all the various entities in the state have worked very hard this spring to get into position for the summer. So I appreciate all the work that folks have done, and I agree it looks like we're in good position going into what I kind of hope is a warmer summer, since we had a really cold winter. So, although I may regret that in August, but so. Any further questions or comments for Diane? Diane?
I'm just going to save mine until after all three presentations, so that in case some of my questions are answered by someone else or in the upcoming presentations, I save people. Thanks.
Sure. Sure, sir.
Diane, could you go a little bit deeper into what the outputs of this study are going to be? I heard you say reinforcements if necessary in the bulk transmission system. Is that really the main focus of the study?
Okay, the main focus of the study is the capability of the bulk system. When the Clean Power Plan comes out, which is anticipated sometime this summer, the state has to start drafting their response and their plan to meet those goals. This study is aimed to look at what are the limits of our existing system and the system we expect to have into the future, to help shape those plans. And if those plans by necessity need to go beyond what the system can handle, what type of upgrades or changes or protocols we need to implement by that time to accommodate, both the Clean Power Plan and the changes that are coming due to REV.
Okay, so we'll move on to Tammy Mitchell's great earrings. Tammy.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Zibelman and Commissioners. As mentioned, I will provide a summary of the New York State Utilities preparedness on the electric distribution system for the 2015 summer season. The Summer Preparedness Program requires that all New York utilities review their electric distribution system capabilities to withstand increased loadings during the summer period. Overall, the annual summer preparation process performed by each utility is similar in methodology. The utilities project summer loads, reviewing historical summer loading information, taking into account historical weather conditions, load growth, and any new business information available. The utilities then simulate its electric system using the projected summer loadings to identify any equipment or specific areas where overloading may occur. From these efforts, projects are selected for completion prior to the next summer season. In terms of our review and monitoring of these efforts, the utilities provide reports to staff starting in March of each year. These reports include a summary of the company's process, procedures, and associated efforts, along with a list of equipment, such as transformers and circuits, that are at or above normal operating ratings during projected peak loading conditions. A list of proposed projects identified for completion prior to June 1st. Typically, these projects include load transfers, capacitor bank installations, transformer upgrades, and sometimes even larger projects like new substations. Additionally, utilities provide status reports to staff on those projects identified for completion prior to the summer. This year, staff is in the process of tracking nearly 100 projects identified by the utilities. At this time, these projects are on track and expected to be completed on or before June 1st. For any projects that are not completed before June 1st, the company will develop and provide contingency plans describing alternatives to address potential problems. Next slide, please. In addition to the distribution system equipment, Another important asset for addressing summer peak loads on the distribution system is the utility distribution demand response programs. Due to its unique characteristics, Con Edison has multiple load relief programs available for deployment during high load conditions. These programs include the Direct Load Control Program, Rider L, the Distribution Load Relief Program, Rider U, and the Commercial System Relief Program, Rider S. The Direct Load Control Program allows Con Edison to reduce enrolled customers' demand by taking control of and cycling air conditioning loads during system emergencies. The total amount of load reduction available through the Direct Load Control Program is approximately 32 megawatts for both small commercial and residential customers enrolled at this time. For the Distribution Load Relief Program, participants provide demand response through load reductions or operation of on-site generation when called upon by Con Edison on a network-by-network basis. The total amount of load reduction available through the Distribution Load Relief Program at this time is approximately 224 megawatts. Con Edison's Commercial System Relief Program is available to all customers that can curtail load or have access to generation to reduce demand by a minimum of 50 kW on an individual customer basis, or to an aggregator that can provide at least 100 kW of load reduction. At this time, the Commercial System Relief Program has approximately 143 megawatts of load reduction signed up. Participation in the company's demand response programs is generally trending upward. Participation in the Distribution Load Relief Program declined somewhat, particularly as you can see from the chart, in 2013 after Superstorm Sandy, but has begun to increase again. Recent changes in the incentive payment structure were made to the Commercial System Relief Program, which have resulted in increased participation in the past couple of years, as you can see from the red bar. Just a note, for each of these programs discussed, the 2015 enrollment levels are only through April of this year, so they could increase. In addition to these existing Con Edison programs, it's important to mention that, consistent with the objectives of REV, the Commission has issued an order requiring that the other New York State utilities develop dynamic load management programs. These proposed programs have been filed, and staff is expecting to bring the recommendations to the Commission in the near future. Overall, based on our analysis, staff is satisfied that the utilities are prepared to meet the needs of the upcoming 2015 summer period. That concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions that you have.
These programs, one of the things that I know happens is both Con Ed and I believe the staff track performance. So do you have any information on terms of where performance has been? In terms of the participants to the program.
I don't have that with me currently, but I believe that
Should
chart.
have given you more notice.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's okay. We can provide that, and I don't know if anybody else has a. I know Marco is going to be here.
Next
he tracks
time,
the programs,
I think with the it'd be an interesting report. I think the commissioners would like to see.
Okay.
It's just as the effectiveness of these programs relative to the performance of the individuals, which I know we monitor.
Right. Yeah. So each of the programs is, I guess you would say, discounted for the expected performance. Just to note, a couple of the programs have actual. There's two different ways to participate. There's a voluntary one, and there's a mandatory. So for the mandatory, there's sort of a capacity payment, a monthly KW payment. So there are, I would say, penalties associated with non-performance. So the expectation is that customers that are enrolled in those programs, the participation would be at a higher level, but we can get you, the breakdown of those for each of the programs.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? I did go to law school, but I forgot you're always supposed to know the answer before you ask the question.
Tammy, of the 100 projects, could you kind of give an overview of the regional area where most of them are? Are they spread out?
Yeah, that covers all of the utilities. The numbers, I think more than half of them are in Con Edison's territory. but I don't have the breakdown in front of me of all the different utilities and where they are. But generally, it's, each of the utilities looks at its system and finds the areas where there may be overloads occurring. I would generally expect that to be in higher load growth areas of each of the utility systems.
Yeah, I think it might be something that the commissioners might want to see a breakdown of that.
Sure, we can get you that too.
Thank you.
The other thing that is happening, and this is obviously an evolving area. I mean, we're looking at this with REV, as you mentioned. We're looking at putting in programs for all of the utilities. These programs are intended to be and operate as a complementary element to the ISO demand response programs, and are really around localized feeder issues, localized relief, which I know we were trying to explain to FERC. So, but I think it'll be, a good overview of how these programs can work in tandem and how the rules are sort of being affected at the state level to be much more friendly towards consumers who might be interested and have the ability to participate to help them reduce their bills, but also improve reliability and resiliency of the grid. So I think it's sort of a great working and a great example of how we can work in tandem with the ISO to create value. I think a further discussion about that, particularly when we're looking at the programs that the other utilities are filing, would be great, would be illuminating, so to speak. All right, any other
Chair,
questions?
Just to follow up, I think that's a great idea. In response to the 100 projects, what we can do is by June 1st, they should all be completed. We'll give you a report in the first week of June on the status, and to the extent they're not completed, what the contingency plans are.
Further questions, comments? Okay, go to the third. Paul Dormecco is going to be talking about the portfolio and the price volatility. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. I'll be providing you with a summary of how the utilities have performed at reducing the electric supply price volatility of their full-service residential customers, go over the utilities' residential electric supply portfolio composition for this summer, as well as finally compare the summer's forecast electric market prices to last summer's actual market prices. Raj will then continue the presentation by going over the last two slides, where I'll provide you with a history of the state's electric supply costs. Next slide. This graph shows the results of the electric utilities' supply price volatility mitigation efforts since June of 2008. It compares the average New York ISO market price volatility, the red line, with the volatility of the utilities' residential electric supply portfolios, the blue line. Or more simply stated, the lines show what the volatility of the utilities' portfolios would have been had they simply purchased spot market versus what it actually is because they engage in hedges. Each point on the line represents the volatility over a 12-month period as measured by the coefficient of variation. As you can see from the chart, the portfolio price volatility is usually around 55% less volatile than the market price. As we all know and can clearly see from the chart, the winter of 2014 resulted in some very high market prices as well as significant increase in volatility. However, because of the hedging policies as well as the utilities' hedging practices, the portfolio volatility experienced a much smaller increase, which full-service residential customers benefited from. As you can also see, since January and February of 2014 have dropped out of the volatility calculation, the volatility is returning to more normal historic levels. So you might be wondering, what does all this volatility mitigation cost these full-service mass market customers over the years? Which brings us to our next slide. This slide shows the annual above or below market costs of utilities' new hedges as a percentage of total supply costs. These new hedges are those that were executed pursuant to the Commission's hedging policy that was issued back in 2004. The blue bars represent the annual hedging gains or losses compared to total supply costs since 2005. Negative percentages mean that customers saved money compared to what they would have paid if no new hedges were entered into and they paid spot prices. You can see that in some years the hedges were in the money, and some years they were out of the money, but on a cumulative basis, over the last 10 years, full-service mass market customers have essentially paid no premium for these new hedges. This chart shows the elements of the composite residential electric supply portfolio for this summer. As shown, about 60% of the portfolio consists of fixed-price contracts, Of the fixed price contracts, the majority are financial in nature. The fixed portion of the portfolio also includes newer physical contracts, older legacy contracts, and a small amount of utilities' own generation with fixed fuel costs, as well as NIPA contracts. The balance of the portfolio is predominantly made up of market purchases, followed by relatively small amounts of utilities' own generation with variable fuel costs, index contracts that are primarily indexed to gas, and options contracts. This chart shows this summer's expected average energy market prices based on NYMEX futures and how they compare to last summer's futures and actuals for New York City, Hudson Valley, and Western New York, or New York ISO zones J, G, and A respectively. Last summer's expected energy market prices that we reported to you last May are in green, last summer's actual market prices are in blue, and this summer's expected market prices are in red. I'm sure you've noticed that last summer's actual market prices turned out to be quite a bit lower than what was expected going into the summer. The primary reasons for this were lower sales due to a relatively mild summer, as well as low natural gas prices. I'm sure you've also noticed that at this point going into the summer, it's expected that this summer's energy prices will be close to last summer's actuals, and again that's driven primarily by expected low natural gas prices. The last slide that I'll be covering shows what last summer's New York ISO strip auction capacity prices were and what this summer's strip auction capacity prices are. As you can see, this summer's strip auction capacity prices are a little bit lower than last summer's. This is primarily due to Danskamer and Astoria 20 generation stations coming back online, as well as the expected return to service to the plants that Diane mentioned earlier. So to conclude, overall, at this point going into the summer, all else equal, it's expected that supply costs will be about the same as last summer, but even if the market does experience an unexpected price spike, full-service mass market customers will not experience the full magnitude of price swings because of the utilities hedging. That concludes this portion of the presentation. Raj will pick up the last two slides.
Yes, will do. So the last two slides discuss the overall costs from a market perspective. We started tracking this in the last 2 years, trying to put this data together. And first, let me acknowledge Adam Evans, who has compiled this information based on public data, this slide as well as the next slide. In terms of the ISO products, roughly speaking, we have capacity, product, and then energy and ancillary services. This particular chart shows just the capacity costs if it were all priced at the market. I want to emphasize that it's all based on spot market prices. To the extent there are bilateral contracts or hedges, the actual cost to consumers could be different, and they would be based on what the bilateral contracts call for. Not knowing all the private bilateral contract details, what we are looking at is using spot market. If the product is priced at spot market prices, what would the cost be? So you'll notice the capacity, there have been 3 zones for a long time, and we started a new capacity zone last year, or that got added last year. So the rest of the state, or the statewide market, is the light green bar. The New York City market is the blue, and the purple is Long Island, and the other solid, whatever the color that is the new capacity zone, the topmost. I don't have my glasses on. What is clearly obvious is the capacity costs swing up and down. 2006, they were on $2 billion on a statewide basis. They dropped in 2008, 9, and 10, and 11, all the way down to less than $1 billion. Then their upswing, 12, 13, 14 was the peak, over $3 billion. And their expected 2015 is an estimate going down. Between 2012 and 2014, the huge increase that you see, more than double, or almost maybe even, more than double, 2.5 times, is because of changes in the system. Almost about 2,000 megawatts of supply retired, exited the market or mothballed, and also about 600 megawatts of SCR resources exited the market. So there was less supply, leading to higher prices. And the resources that exited included Astoria units in the city, Far Rockaway and Glenwood and Long Island, the Dunkirk units, and the Danskammer units. They add up to about 2,000, and the SCR is about 600 megawatts exiting market. In addition, the peak loads also went up by about 300 to 400 megawatts between 12 and 14. So lower supply, higher demand, prices go up. 2015, and also the new capacities on 2014 is the newest addition. 2015, we estimate the levels to come down to the 2013 levels because, again, some resources are coming back into the market, especially the Danskammer units and the Astoria. Some of the Astoria units are expected to come back. The next slide shows total supply costs. So the energy and ancillary services is the longer bar, and the capacity that you just saw. So the energy and supply is bulk of the supply costs. It varies between $9 billion as low in 2009 when it was a warm, cool summer and low gas prices, as high as 16 billion or so in 2008, very hot summer and high gas prices. And so in between 2012 and 2014, again in the last 3 years, they've been inching up, and a lot of it can be attributed to higher gas prices. 2012 was about $2.75 a million BTU. 2014 is around $4.36 a million BTU, almost 60% increase. Although this supply cost increase is not one-to-one, given that some part of the time, 60 to 80% of the time, gas is in the margin, not all 100% of the hours. So that shows you a total cost of the New York control area is just slightly a notch under $15 billion. Again, these are priced at spot market prices. So that provides a bigger picture perspective of what the total cost of the electric supply component is. This does not include any of the delivery component. The delivery is separate, and that's fully regulated. This is all pretty much, to a large extent, competitive market-driven pricing. So that concludes our quick overview of the pricing arena, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave and Raj. So going back, frankly, to the mark-to-market as well as the portfolio, we last year after the polar vortex, we started working with the distribution utilities to take a look at their hedging strategies. Are you seeing that reflected in both the prices and the price for 2000 here from the summer, or in the projections?
Yeah, let me start and Paul jump in. So after the polar vortex, especially the upstate utilities that have suffered most of the volatility, NICE, again, National Grid, have modified their portfolios and increased the level of hedges. But given that volatility is mostly winter, there's a lot more hedging in the winter period than in the summer period. A lot of folks think summer prices are higher. Sometimes winter prices are even higher than summer prices. That's because there are gas capacity constraints, so the gas capacity costs are very high, and what the generators face in the winter drive the marginal prices, and so winter prices are high and volatile, and so the winter hedges are higher than the summer hedges.
And then the other question I have, all things being equal, and I know it's looking at projections, but in looking at your last slide on supply cost 2006 to 2014, and then looking at the energy price comparison, and I don't want to sort of jinx ourselves, but it would strike me that for 2015, given what we're seeing as the forward price reductions, we're going to see potentially either the same or a delta down for 2015.
That's all else equal. That should be true. Yes.
Good news, I hope.
That's correct.
Touch wood. Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you. Any further questions? Commissioner Sayre.
Raj, I think I heard you say that staff doesn't know the bilateral contract details and so can't work them into these charts. Is that information that we ought to be getting?
We do know the utilities' bilateral contracts that they engage in for their mass market customers, for sure. And utilities do not engage in any hedges for the large customers, for the mandatory hourly pricing customers. And to the extent the hourly pricing customers engage in hedges with the ESCOs or third-party providers, that's private, confidential information we do not know. And so, and there could be other type of bilateral contracts between generators and loads. So the easiest publicly available data is the spot market prices. This gives you trends. But in the long run, even the hedges would reflect the expectations of the market price. But we do know the hedges that utilities enter into for mass market customers. Yes.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I do understand that this is a for information only item, but that doesn't lessen the importance of the item and what we're doing. And when I look at it, the Commission has a responsibility to ensure that utilities are prepared to provide New Yorkers with safe, adequate, and reliable power throughout the summer months. And this summer preparedness review is very helpful to us in determining whether or not we're meeting our responsibility and what we might need to do to continue. And so for me, when I looked at this, I also looked back at what we've done the last 5 years and what's been proposed over that. And I know staff has gone even further, and I appreciate that. And we really do need to ensure, and we are ensuring, that we have adequate resources, including capacity resources, to meet this summer's projected demand, as well as the required reserve margins, and also that the transmission system is ready and able to serve the summer's projected peak loads and meet the reliability criteria. The couple of questions that I had that have been answered is looking at, do we expect a high demand this year? What are our energy reserves, and are they, will they exceed the peak demand expected on the hottest of summer days? And looking also at our diverse portfolio of generation sources. In addition to demonstrating that utilities have the ability to handle the electricity needs of their customers for the coming summer season, we have in the past also looked at how we are on emergency planning efforts and coordination, as well as customer communication. And this is especially important post-Sandy. So I just wonder if, and I don't know if Mike Warden is the best person to address those things that might be going on with the emergency planning aspects.
So you may recall back in March, you approved the utility emergency plans, the electric utility emergency plans, and the electric utilities are going through a process now of doing their annual drills for these plans, or what we ask them to do, and it's part of the regs, is to have those drills after their plans are approved prior to June 1st, which is the beginning of hurricane season. Our staff has been going to these drills. In fact, there's a drill on Long Island today. Our department staff is there monitoring the drill, and will provide feedback to the utilities if there are things they need to do differently. So we think the utilities are prepared. There's always lessons to be learned in any emergency, but we think they're ready for the summer.
Okay. And what about vegetation management and wildfire planning?
So vegetation management is something that is going on throughout the year. All the utilities, with one exception, are on a cycle. The one utility that's not on a cycle for its distribution vegetation management is moving in that direction. We hope to do that in the next rate filing. From a transmission perspective, a lot of that work has to be done in the wintertime because of a variety of factors and getting access to right-of-ways. So there really is a lot of focus on transmission getting ready for the summer period.
Okay, great. Now there are obviously, and I think Diane Barney, you touched upon this, the planned minimum reserves that to manage uncertainties, and what I heard was that we are have adequate minimum reserves to manage the uncertainties such as load forecast uncertainties, unplanned unit outages, and also varying levels of customer participation in resource standards. I just want to look at that from the minimum reserve margins and just get sort of another layer of comfort in that.
Well, the installed reserve margin calculation that is performed annually by the New York State Reliability Council takes a look on a probabilistic basis of what resources would be available and how many additional resources we need over the load level. This calculation takes into account the history of the units themselves, the history of technologies, and what you can expect to have available to you at different times of the year. And the calculation right now is that we need 17% above peak load. If you take a look at the one slide, okay, that would, let's see, come to, I believe it's 5,700 megawatts of available capability over our peak load. We have that out there plus an additional 2,800 megawatts.
So we're at about 124% of peak.
Correct. Okay. Location does enter into that. That's, those resources are there. You could have a locational problem if you lose too many resources in a confined area. But the system operators pretty much are prepared for that, run those contingencies, know what they would have to do. We wouldn't necessarily be running at an economically optimal position, but we would be in a reliability position.
Okay. Great, thank you. What's important for me is not just that we're prepared for the normal, but that we're prepared for any challenges that may present, and that's really what I got from this presentation, so it is very helpful. One of the things is, looking back and having gone back over the last few years is also noticing sort of the trend of, originally we looked at a 2004 hedging policy, 2007 supply portfolio guidelines, and 2008 volatility reporting requirements. And each year we have looked at the necessity of what those policies, need to be changed or tweaked, and, with the anything that might present itself differently from past years. And we did that after Superstorm Sandy, and continuing that sort of drill down and looking at those things. And I heard today an important takeaway on when Diane Barney spoke on the changes on the system that we are having to look towards in terms of REV and the EPA Clean Power Plan, and going now beyond what we're currently doing and drilling down some more and looking at studies so that we can be focused on making sure that we're as prepared as we need to be and what the effects are from those things. So I really just want to thank staff for presenting us today the system planning that's being done not only by the staff but by the ISO and NYPA and the utilities, as well as many other folks, and ensuring customers will continue receiving reliable and safe service as we enter into the peak demands of a New York summer. And it sounds to me that the biggest takeaway is that the forecast is that customers should really feel confident that we're prepared for this summer, and that we're prepared for any challenges that might come. And just really a kudos to the utilities who are doing a good job, especially on their load relief programs and their load control programs, because those are helping when there are challenges. And I think we should, really recognize that and look at what's happening with those programs, especially as we enter, new things that are on the horizon. So, that's it. So thank you, everyone. And, if we were voting, I'd vote yes. So thanks.
We can all vote for a mild summer and low temperatures and sunny days and low energy prices. Commissioner Akinpora?
Just to kind of follow up and say, I've been listening to these reports for quite a bit, and, every year we prepare. But sometimes, like we mentioned before, things come along like polar vortex that we've never experienced before. So always the preparedness is there, and then there are lessons learned. So, I know that a lot of work goes into this, not only from all of you and the staff, but as Commissioner Berman mentioned, other entities that work throughout the state to ensure that the state is prepared at all times. So I'd just like to say thank you, and I agree with the chair. We're all waiting for summer, but let's not have too hot of a summer with a lot of bad storms.
Yeah, I
Raj.
just wanted to thank all those folks, not only those who are at the table here, but all those who helped pull this stuff together. It took a lot of effort and work in getting this prepared, so thanks to all the staff.
Yeah, thank you, Raj, and I want to echo that. I know that one of the greatest things about this presentation is the amount of very complex analysis that gets boiled down into very understandable slides, and I think you guys do a great job of doing that. I also do want to note that relative to the system as well, we even though we didn't have a polar vortex, we had actually a very cold winter, and I think that we are seeing that the system we have is very reliable, and it is actually the efforts of the utilities, the ISOs, the generators, who really make sure that the system is available and is running, and are frankly there 7x24 running that airplane that never lands. So we do appreciate all those efforts. So thank you, and we can now move on to the next part of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. And with respect to that, Commissioner Sayre, I believe you want to recuse yourself from item 561?
That's correct. Thank you.
Do any of the other commissioners wish to recuse or abstain from any matters? Hearing none, then I will take a vote. All those in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? There being no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. So thank you all. Again, thanks to staff. That was a great presentation. And before we go, because I forgot last time, I do want to welcome Scott Wiener, who's our Director of Markets and Innovation. Scott's been here. I know many of you have met him. We are extremely appreciative that he's joining us and is helping us, particularly with the Rev docket. So welcome, Scott. And he's done such a great job of integrating himself into the agency that I forgot that he was new. Thank you. So with that, Secretary Burgess, is there anything more in front of us today?
There's nothing more for today, and the next commission meeting is Wednesday, June 17th here in Albany.
Great. Thank you.